The early morning sun stretched its rays across the North Carolina sky, casting soft golden light over the grounds of Brightmore Academy, a prestigious private school nestled in the suburbs of Raleigh. Majestic old oak trees stood tall along the pathway, their leaves rustling in the breeze, as if whispering tales of tradition and power. The main building, with its stunning red brick walls and soaring glass windows, resembled more of a castle than a school. Everything here, from the meticulously manicured lawns to the gleaming plaques bearing the names of donors, radiated wealth and permanence. This was a place where affluent families sent their children, not just to learn, but to be molded into part of the elite class. But this morning, two small figures walking through the wrought iron gate of Brightmore brought a different kind of breeze. Maya and Mia Carter, the 16-year-old twin sisters, moved in sync, their steps confident, yet unhurried. Their navy blue uniforms were crisp and neat, ties perfectly knotted, and their curly hair was pulled up high, showcasing their faces with bright eyes and slightly raised chins. They looked just alike, like two peas in a pod. But if you looked closely, you'd notice Maya had a gentle smile, always lingering at the corners of her lips, while Mia had a sharper gaze, as if she was always taking in everything around her. They knew they were stepping into a world that wouldn't welcome them. Their father, Malcolm Carter, made that clear the night before as the family gathered around the dinner table. "Brightmore isn't like the places you've been to before," he said, his voice deep but as solid as rock. "People will look at you, not because of who you are, but because they think you don't belong there. But remember, you belong anywhere you choose to stand firm." Malcolm, a former soldier with a tall, imposing figure and eyes sharp as knives, had taught them not just how to defend themselves with their fists, both were black belt taekwondo fighters, but also how to keep their spirits strong against invisible storms. As Maya and Mia approached the main building, they felt the first piercing gazes upon them. It wasn't the innocent curiosity of children, but a cold, sharp look, like a blade honed to perfection. A group of students gathered near the fountain fell silent as the sisters walked by. A girl, with her blonde hair tied up, tilted her head slightly, whispering something to her friend, and they both covered their mouths, stifling giggles. Maya glanced at Mia, their eyes exchanging a quick heartbeat of understanding. "Stay calm," Mia's eyes seemed to say. "We've been through this before." But Brightmore isn't just about the looks. It's also about the words, spoken just loud enough to be heard, but soft enough to deny if questioned. "Look at that," a male voice boomed from the staircase leading into the building. Evan Whitaker, tall with slicked-back brown hair and a smug grin, leaned against the railing, arms crossed over his chest. He was the center of attention, like a self-proclaimed star on the stage he called school. "Just got here and already thinks he's someone," Evan drawled, his voice stretching out, enough to make his friends burst into laughter. Tyler and Nate, always trailing behind Evan like shadows, chimed in with their mocking remarks. What kind of special admission did they give him? A scholarship. From the slums. Maya felt a hot surge rising in her chest, but she held it back and took a deep breath. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "They want you to react. Don't give them what they want." She kept her face calm, her eyes fixed straight ahead, as if Evan and his crew were nothing but faint shadows. Next to her, Mia tightened her grip on her backpack straps, her fingertips turning slightly white, but she didn't look back either. They had faced similar words before, back in their old neighborhood, at the public school, before they moved here. But in Brightmore, those words carried a different weight, sharper, colder, as if forged by the confidence that no one would dare to challenge them. They walked through the large glass doors of the main building, the cool air conditioning rushing in, refreshing but failing to ease the heavy weight on their shoulders. The long hallway with its sparkling marble floor was lined with display cases showcasing golden trophies and photos of successful alumni. Everything here screamed, "This place isn't for everyone." Maya's eyes skimmed over a photo of last year's student council, spotting Evan right in the center, his proud smile just as arrogant as it was today. She wondered if he ever thought about someone daring to stand up to him. "Let's go," Mia whispered, her voice just loud enough for her sister to hear. "Don't pay any attention to them." It wasn't a comforting word, but rather a reminder. They had practiced this their whole lives, how to walk when all eyes were against them, how to keep their backs straight, even when their hearts raced faster than usual. They understood each other without needing to say much, a deep harmony forged through the years of growing up together, facing the world as a team. But as they turned into the hallway leading to their first class, another voice rang out, this time closer and sharper. "Hey, you two!" Tyler called, stepping out from a shadowy corner with Nate right behind him. "Lost your way? The janitor's closet is in the back." Their laughter echoed down the hallway, drawing a few curious glances from other students. Maya paused for just a second, just long enough to feel the anger bubbling up inside her. But she quickly caught up to Mia, and the two continued on, as if those words were nothing more than a passing breeze. They arrived at the classroom just as the bell rang, the chatter of students gradually fading as the teacher walked in. But even as they took their seats, Maya and Mia could still feel the stares from the corner of the room, from the back row, from the not-so-hidden glances. Brightmore was not just a school, it was a battleground, and the sisters knew all too well. They had just stepped into the first round. A storm was coming slowly but surely, and even though they were prepared to face it, no one could predict just how hard it would hit. The evenings at the Carter home always carry a special sense of peace, as if the outside world, with all its noise and judgments, couldn't touch the little kitchen bathed in warm yellow light. The oak dining table, worn at the edges, is where Maya and Mia sit across from each other, pencils in hand, jotting down notes for their homework, while the savory aroma of roasted meat and mashed potatoes wafts from the oven. Malcolm Carter, the father of the two sisters, stands by the stove, a dark blue apron tied around his waist, his sturdy hands those of a former soldier stirring the sauce with a focus that feels almost ritualistic. Yet his gaze, sharp and meaningful, continually watches over his two daughters. "How was your first day at Brightmore?" Malcolm asked, his deep voice rising above the sizzle of the pan. The question didn't carry the usual curiosity. It was an invitation, a doorway for Maya and Mia to share what he had long suspected. Maya looked up from her math book, her lips pressed together lightly before breaking into a faint smile. "Just like Dad said," she replied, her tone flat but laced with a hint of sarcasm. "They look at us like we just stepped off another planet. But honestly, it's not surprising at all." Mia, underlining a passage in her literature book, added without looking up, "Some kids think they can make us feel ashamed just with a few cheap jokes. Evan Whitaker and his crew. They called us scholarship rats right outside the classroom." Her voice was calm, but the way she gripped the pencil revealed a smoldering fire within. Malcolm stopped stirring the pot, set the wooden spoon down, and turned to face his two children. His gaze wasn't one of pity, but of deep understanding, as if he were looking back at himself in the days when he faced similar stares. "They want to see how long you can hold out," he said, his voice as solid as granite. "But you know who you are, and you know what matters more than empty words." Maya nodded, but her gaze drifted out the window, where darkness was settling over the peaceful streets of Raleigh. She recalled the times she practiced with her dad in the backyard, under the dim light of the porch. Malcolm didn't just teach them how to throw a spinning kick or lock an opponent's arm. He taught them about control, how to keep their minds sharp even when their hearts wanted to explode. "Never hit to prove a point," he would often say. "Only hit when there's no other choice left, and when you do, hit to end it." Meanwhile, Mia set her pen down, propping her chin on her hand as she looked at her father. "I'm not afraid of them, Dad," she said, her voice strong. "But I hate the way they think they have the right to do this, like we don't deserve to be there." Malcolm walked up to the table, pulled out a chair, and clasped his hands together. "They think that way because they've been taught to," he replied. "Brightmore is a playground for families like the Whitakers. They believe that money and a name can buy everything, even the right to decide who belongs there. But you don't need their permission. You've earned your spot there on your own." His words were like a breeze blowing through, easing some of the heaviness in Maya and Mia's hearts. They didn't come to Brightmore because of privilege or pity. They earned their scholarships with perfect grades and an essay that made the admissions committee convene twice. But at Brightmore, that didn't seem to be enough. Every step they took down the marble hallway was a challenge to the unspoken order of the school. The next day, the early sunlight spread golden across the Brightmore campus, but the atmosphere was still as chilly as the day before. Maya and Mia walked through the gate, their backpacks securely on their shoulders, their eyes scanning the schoolyard like two warriors surveying the terrain. Groups of students still gathered, laughter and whispers rising as the sisters passed by. Evan Whitaker, as usual, stood at the center, near the bronze statue of the school's founder, a smug smile never leaving his face. "Look, the twins are here again," Evan called out, his voice louder than necessary, drawing laughter from Tyler and Nate. "I bet they got lost on their way from the work area to here." His words were like arrows, shot out to hurt, and a few other students turned to look, some giggling, while others just watched quietly. Maya felt the heat rising to her ears, but she kept her steps steady and her shoulders back. She glanced at Mia, seeing her sister biting her lip, her gaze sharp as a knife. They didn't stop, didn't respond, but every mocking word was like a stone thrown at the wall of patience they had built. Their father had taught them that a reaction is a gift that should only be given when the time is right, and this was not that time. In their first history class with Ms. Harris, the two sisters sat in the middle row, deliberately choosing a spot that wasn't too prominent, but also not hidden away. Ms. Harris, a middle-aged woman with thick glasses, called out their names during roll call without looking up from her list, her voice flat, like she was reading off a receipt. When Maya raised her hand to answer a question about the Civil War, a few students behind her snickered softly, and she caught the whisper of the word scholarship somewhere in the background. Mia, sitting next to her, scribbled on the edge of her notebook. Forget them. Lunchtime is another challenge. Maya and Mia sit in a corner of the schoolyard under the shade of a big oak tree, eating the sandwiches their mom packed for them. A crowd of students gathers a few dozen feet away, their chatter creating an invisible wall that separates the sisters from the rest of Brightmore. Evan and his group of friends stroll by, deliberately slowing down. "Didn't anyone tell you two that this area isn't for outsiders?" Nate sneers, his tone dripping with mockery. Tyler bursts out laughing, while Evan merely glances over, as if this was too easy to bother with. Maya took a bite of her sandwich, chewing slowly, her eyes glued to the book in her hands. Mia, on the other hand, stared directly at Nate, her gaze so icy that he took a step back before reassuring himself with a forced smile. "Let's go," Evan said, signaling for the group to move on. But the last glance he threw at the two sisters held an unspoken promise. This isn't over. When they got home that afternoon, Maya and Mia sat in the backyard, the sunset painting the sky in shades of red. Malcolm was fixing an old wooden chair, sweat glistening on his forehead. "How was your day?" he asked, not taking his eyes off his work. "It's tougher than yesterday," Mia replied, her voice steady. "They won't back down, but we won't let them win either." Malcolm stopped, set down the saw, and looked at his two kids. "Good," he said. "They'll push harder because you're not backing down. But remember, strength isn't about striking back right away. It's about knowing you're strong enough to wait." Maya nodded, feeling like a tight string inside her had loosened a bit. Mia clenched her fists, her eyes shining with determination. They knew Brightmore was going to be a long battle, but they had been forged for fights like this. The storm was approaching, and no matter how fierce it was, Maya and Mia would stand strong not just for themselves, but for everything their father had taught them. The days at Brightmore Academy flowed like a song with an increasingly frantic rhythm, each note carrying a hint of new tension. Maya and Mia Carter had grown accustomed to the sharp stares, the whispers deliberately meant for them to hear, and the accidental shoulder bumps in the hallway. But on that Friday morning, as the sun just peeked over the Raleigh sky, the atmosphere in the schoolyard felt heavier than usual. Something was lurking, like the breath of a storm about to hit. Maya walked through the school gate, feeling an immediate shift in the atmosphere. A larger crowd of students gathered near the fountain than usual, their whispers buzzing like a swarm of bees, full of hidden meanings. Mia, walking closely beside her, tilted her head slightly, her sharp gaze sweeping across the courtyard. "Something's off," she whispered, just loud enough for Maya to hear. Maya nodded slightly, her heart racing a beat faster, but both of them kept their strides steady, shoulders back, as if nothing could make them falter. They turned into the main hallway where shiny steel lockers lined the marble wall. Maya and Mia's lockers were at the end of the row, next to a window overlooking the backyard. As they approached, Maya suddenly stopped, her breath catching in her chest. Mia halted too, her gaze hardening as she saw what her sister had just realized. Their locker wasn't just a cold, gray slab of steel anymore. It was covered with angry red paint, scrawled with hurtful words that cut like knives. "Go back to where you belong, outsider." And even worse, words that only cowardice and prejudice would dare to write. Alongside those were crude drawings of distorted, exaggerated cartoon faces, sketched with black marker to mock the sisters' skin color and features. Scraps of paper were stuffed through the locker cracks, falling to the floor in a shower, each piece carrying handwritten insults, as if a whole group had competed to see who could leave the most vicious slur. Maya felt a rush of blood to her head, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Mia stood frozen, her gaze like a suppressed flame, smoldering but ready to ignite at any moment. Laughter began to echo from behind, not loud, but enough to resonate in the hallway. A group of students had gathered a few feet away, phones raised, flashes going off as they snapped pictures and recorded videos. Their laughter grew louder, like a wave sweeping in more onlookers, turning the hallway into a stage of cruelty. Evan Whitaker leaned against the wall opposite, arms crossed over his chest, a smug smile stretching across his face. Tyler and Nate stood on either side, their eyes sparkling with delight, as if the three of them had just completed a masterpiece. "Look at that! It matches your cabinet perfectly," Evan called out, his voice ringing out like a triumphant announcement. "Consider it a formal welcome gift from Brightmore." Maya turned back, her gaze locked onto Evan. For a moment, she wanted to rush at him, to wipe that smile off his face. But her father's voice echoed in her mind, clear as it had been the night before. "Control is power. Don't let them drag you down to their level." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stand still, even though every cell in her body was screaming to fight back. Mia, however, couldn't completely hold back her anger. She took a step toward Evan, her gaze sharp as a knife. "You think this is clever?" she asked, her voice low but cutting through the laughter of the crowd. "You think this stuff scares us?" Evan raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by the direct response, but he quickly regained his confidence, shrugging it off. "Whether you're scared or not doesn't change a thing," he replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You two don't belong here. The sooner you realize that, the better for both of you." Laughter erupted again, louder this time, as if Evan had just scored a point in a game only he knew the rules to. Maya grabbed Mia's hand, pulling gently to stop her sister from moving forward. She could feel Mia's heartbeat through her fingers, quick and warm. But Mia didn't resist. They stood there, two twin sisters facing a crowd that was waiting for them to crumble. But they didn't crumble. They stood tall, their gazes unwavering like two oaks in the midst of a fierce wind. A teacher, Mr. Baxter, walked down the hallway, his leather briefcase in hand. He glanced at the lockers, then at the crowd, his gaze briefly landing on Maya and Mia. But he said nothing. He just quickened his pace, as if this was not worth his concern. His silence was like another knife, sharper than the insults on the lockers. It conveyed that at Brightmore, things like this were allowed to happen, as long as no one made a fuss about it. Maya turned back to look at the locker, her gaze sweeping over each line of text, each drawing. She wasn't crying, she wasn't trembling, but her heart felt heavy as lead. She thought of her dad, of those evenings when he taught them how to stand strong, how to never let anyone take away their worth. But right now, standing in the hallway with dozens of eyes fixed on her, she felt a tiny crack in the wall of patience she had built. Mia leaned in, whispering just loud enough for her sister to hear. "They want us to run, Maya, but they won't get their way." Mia's words were like a gentle breeze, easing some of the anger boiling inside Maya. They looked at each other, their eyes exchanging a promise that didn't need to be spoken. "We will get through this together." But both of them knew, standing there in the hallway filled with eyes and laughter, that this was not the end. This was a declaration of war, written in red paint and cowardice. Evan and his friends had crossed the line, and even though Maya and Mia hadn't responded yet, they knew that moment was drawing near. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was right here, right in front of them. The halls of Brightmore Academy still echoed with giggles and whispers, but Maya and Mia Carter stood frozen in front of the defaced locker, like two statues carved from resilience. The red spray-painted words and distorted drawings on the locker were not just a cruel prank. They were a blatant challenge, designed to shatter the spirits of the two sisters in front of the entire school. A crowd of students lingered nearby, some still holding up their phones to record the moment, their eyes sparkling with curiosity and delight. Evan Whitaker, standing a few steps away, crossed his arms, a smug grin on his face like a badge of victory. Tyler and Nate, his two loyal sidekicks, laughed loudly, as if the whole world was on their side. Maya felt each heartbeat pounding in her chest, like a drum urging her to take action. She wanted to scream, wanted to wipe away those hurtful words, wanted to make Evan and his friends understand that they had picked the wrong target. But she forced herself to stand still, her hand clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palm. Her father, Malcolm's voice echoed in her mind, clear and steady like a lighthouse in a storm. "They want you to lose control. Don't give them that power." She took a deep breath, slowly, trying to push the flames of anger down beneath the surface. Mia, on the other hand, didn't hide her anger as well as her sister did. Her gaze was locked onto Evan, sharp as a finely honed blade. "You think this is going to make us walk away?" she asked, her voice low but cutting, slicing through the noise of the crowd like a knife. "You're wrong. Dead wrong." Evan smirked, his eyes flashing with surprise at the blunt response, but he quickly regained his confident demeanor. "Oh, the tough girl here," he said, taking a step closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "But let's be real. You both know you don't belong here. Why not save everyone the trouble? Pack your bags and get out." The crowd erupted, some laughing loudly, others whispering among themselves, but all waiting for Maya and Mia's reaction. That was what Evan wanted, a show where the two sisters would either crumble or explode, and no matter which way it went, he would come out on top. Maya felt the weight of those gazes, like a net tightening around them. She glanced at Mia, their eyes exchanging a silent message. Don't let them win. Not yet. But that moment was shattered when another student, a girl with a ponytail of red hair, approached the locker, pretending to examine it before bursting into giggles. "This is so funny," she said loudly, enough for the whole hallway to hear. "Whoever came up with this is a genius." Her words poured gasoline on the fire, making the crowd's laughter grow louder and sharper, like a beast being unleashed from its chain. Mia turned around, her eyes blazing. "Funny?" she repeated, her voice rising, sharper. "Is writing this garbage funny to you?" She took a step toward the red-haired girl, not aggressively, but enough to make her back away, the smile on her face fading away. Evan laughed loudly, clapping slowly as if he were watching a play. "Come on, calm down," he said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "It's just a joke. If you two can't handle it, maybe Brightmore isn't the place for you." Maya grasped Mia's arm, her fingers tightening gently, not to hold her back, but to remind her. She could feel her sister's breath, quick and hot, but Mia didn't move forward. The two sisters stood there, facing Evan and the crowd, their gazes unwavering. They didn't say anything more, but their silence spoke volumes. They weren't running away, they weren't bowing their heads, and they were definitely not breaking. A security guard, Mr. Jenkins, finally appeared at the end of the hallway, moving slowly, his gaze sweeping over the scene before him. He paused, glanced at the locker, then looked at the crowd, but instead of intervening, he simply shook his head and continued on, as if this were just a minor inconvenience not worth his time. His indifference felt like another cut, deeper than the insults scrawled on the locker. It reminded Maya and Mia that at Brightmore they weren't just battling Evan and his crew, but also a system that had grown all too comfortable with allowing such behavior to thrive. Maya turned back to look at the locker, her gaze sweeping over each line of text, each drawing, as if she were etching them into her memory. She didn't cry. She had learned long ago not to let tears fall in front of her enemies. But she felt a shift inside her, like a string that had been pulled too tight finally starting to fray. She thought of her father, of the evenings he taught them how to stand strong, how to turn anger into power. But right now, she wondered if there was a limit to patience, and if they had come close to that limit. Mia, standing close by, whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "They think we're weak, Maya. They think this is enough to make us give up." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Evan, Tyler, and Nate. "But they don't know who we are." Maya nodded slightly, a small smile flickering across her lips, not out of joy, but out of determination. "They will know," she replied, her voice low but firm. Soon enough, the crowd began to disperse as the school bell rang, laughter gradually fading into the sound of shoes clattering on the marble floor. Evan shot one last glance at the two sisters, as if assessing how much longer they could hold up. But Maya and Mia didn't care. They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, their eyes glued to the locker, as if facing a storm they knew would only grow stronger. As the hallway fell silent, Maya opened her locker, and a flurry of crumpled insults tumbled to the floor. She didn't bend down to pick them up, nor did she glance at them again. Instead, she pulled out her textbooks, shut the locker, and turned to Mia. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady but carrying a new weight. "We're not done yet." Mia nodded, her eyes lighting up with an unquenchable fire. They walked on, two twin sisters, not as victims, but as warriors gearing up for a real battle. The storm had arrived, and this time, they wouldn't just stand their ground. They would fight back. The Brightmore Academy courtyard shone brightly under the Monday morning sun, but the atmosphere was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. The incident at the lockers last Friday had spread throughout the school, not as a warning, but as an invitation for bullies to take their game further. Maya and Mia Carter walked through the school gates, their gazes sharper than ever, like two warriors sensing smoke before the battle. They didn't say much, but the connection between the sisters needed no words, a glance, a slight nod, enough to understand that today would be different. They had endured long enough. The insults, the shoves, the nasty words scrawled on the lockers, each one like a stone piling up against their wall of patience. But this morning, as Maya walked through the schoolyard, she felt a shift within herself. She no longer wanted to just stand by and wait. Mia, walking closely beside her, tightened her backpack straps, her gaze like a flame that had been held back for too long, just waiting for a spark to ignite. The crowd of students gathered as usual, but there was something different in the way they looked at the two sisters. Some whispered and pointed, while most remained silent, as if waiting for a show to begin. Evan Whitaker stood near the bronze statue in the center of the courtyard, his smug demeanor unchanged, like a self-proclaimed king in his domain. Tyler and Nate flanked him, their eyes sparkling with excitement, like wolves that had caught the scent of their prey. "Look, the twins haven't given up yet," Evan called out loudly as Maya and Mia approached, his voice ringing out like a declaration of war. "I thought after the locker incident you two would have known to pack it up and leave." Laughter erupted from Tyler and Nate, followed by a few giggles from the crowd around them. Maya stopped. For the first time since arriving in Brightmore, she didn't move forward but turned to face Evan. Her gaze was cold, unwavering, as if she were looking right through his arrogant facade. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady yet sharp, slicing through the air like a knife. "We're not going anywhere." The crowd buzzed, surprise spreading like wildfire. Evan raised an eyebrow, his smile momentarily faltering, but he quickly regained his confidence. "Oh, playing it tough, huh?" he said, stepping closer, closing the gap between them. "But let's be real. Do you two really think you can hang around here? Brightmore isn't a place for people like you." Mia stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Maya, her gaze fierce. "Brightmore isn't just yours," she replied, her voice low but firm, each word striking like a stone against Evan's armor. "You're just a coward, hiding behind your friends and cheap tricks. Without them, you're nothing." Mia's words were like a spark falling into a powder keg. The crowd held its breath, the murmurs suddenly silenced. Evan's face turned red, his eyes flashing with anger, but beneath that was a flicker of panic. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of the whole school. Tyler and Nate stepped forward, as if ready to defend their leader, but Evan raised his hand to stop them, a smile returning to his face, though it now looked forced. "Watch your mouth," Evan said, his voice lower but still trying to sound in control. "Talking like that is only going to make things worse for both of you." Maya smiled, but her smile lacked warmth. "Worse?" she repeated, her tone light yet sharp. "You think we've never seen worse? You and your friends are just a bunch of kids playing a game that's way over your heads." Her words struck directly at Evan's pride. The crowd began to stir. Some students whispered, while others exchanged glances, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Evan stepped closer, just a few feet away from Maya and Mia, his expression darkening. "Watch out!" he said, his voice almost a growl. "Don't push me to do something you'll regret." But Maya and Mia didn't back down. They stood there shoulder to shoulder, their eyes locked on Evan, like two oaks braving a fierce wind. The silence stretched for a few seconds, heavy like a blanket draped over the schoolyard. Then, as if unable to bear the weight of the sisters' gaze any longer, Evan made his move. He pushed hard against Maya's shoulder, enough to make her take a step back, but she quickly regained her balance, her feet planted firmly as if rooted to the ground. The crowd gasped, a murmur rising like a wave. Tyler, seizing the moment, stepped closer to Mia and forcefully knocked the book from her hands to the ground. The pages fluttered down onto the stone floor, like a declaration that the game had crossed the line from words to action. "Is there anything else?" Tyler mocked, his eyes sparkling with aggression. Nate stood behind, laughing loudly, as if all three of them were certain that Maya and Mia would either run away or crumble. But they were wrong. Wrong in a devastating way. Maya looked down at Mia's book, then lifted her gaze, her eyes no longer holding back. They were afire, forged through years of training with her father, through countless evenings when he taught them that strength doesn't lie in anger, but in how they wield it. "Enough," she said, her voice low, yet resonant, like an irrevocable declaration. "You want to fight? You'll get one." Mia stood tall, her gaze locking with Maya's, and in that moment, without a single word, they understood each other completely. This was no longer about enduring. This was the moment they fought back, not out of anger, but because they refused to let anyone strip away their dignity for even one more second. Evan laughed loudly, but his smile now had a tense edge to it. "Looks like you two want to be heroes," he said, trying to keep his tone mocking. "All right then, let's see what you can do." He pushed Maya again, this time harder as if to assert his control. But this time, Maya didn't back down. She stood her ground, her gaze locked onto Evan, and for a moment, the schoolyard held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. The Brightmore schoolyard felt like a battleground, thick with tension and the eager gazes of the crowd of students. Maya Carter stood her ground against Evan Whitaker, her eyes unwavering even as he shoved her for the second time, harder this time, as if trying to force her to back down. But Maya wouldn't budge. She could feel her heartbeat, steady and strong, like a lesson honed from countless training sessions with her dad. When the moment comes, you'll know. And when it does, act with control. That moment had arrived. Beside her, Mia Carter picked up the stack of books that Tyler had knocked to the ground, her movements slow yet deliberate, as if she was gearing up for something bigger. She stood tall, her sharp gaze locked onto Tyler, then shifted to Nate, and finally to Evan. The crowd murmured, whispers crashing like waves, but no one dared to speak up. Everyone felt that this moment was no longer a joke, it was a turning point, where everything would change. "Enough," Maya repeated, her voice cutting through the unusual silence, each word like a stone dropping into a still pond. "You want us to react? Fine. But be careful what you wish for." Evan laughed loudly, but his smile now had a forced quality, as if he sensed a shift in the atmosphere but didn't want to admit it. "She talks a big game," he said, trying to sound mocking. "But it's easy to talk. Let's see what she can actually do." He charged forward, shoving hard into Maya's shoulder for the third time, this time with both strength and clear intent. But Maya was ready. She leaned to the side, quick as a shadow, dodging Evan's push with precision honed from years of taekwondo training. In an instant, she reached out, her palm slamming into Evan's chest with just enough force to send him stumbling back a few steps, his breath catching in surprise. The crowd inhaled sharply, whispers erupting like a fire just ignited. Tyler, unable to stand still, charged at Mia, swinging his hand as if to slap her on the shoulder. But Mia was ready. She bent low, spun around like a dancer, and delivered a precise, sweeping kick to Tyler's leg. He lost his balance and crashed to the ground with a heavy thud, his face flushed with pain and embarrassment. The crowd erupted, some in shock, some in excitement, but all unable to tear their eyes away from the scene unfolding before them. Nate, seeing his friend fall, let out a roar and charged at Mia, his arms raised high as if he wanted to take her down. But Mia had been trained for moments like this. She sidestepped quick as a flash and grabbed Nate's arm, twisting it with a practiced move. She yanked hard, sending him stumbling forward, then gave him a gentle push, using his own momentum to send him crashing down on top of Tyler. Both of them sprawled on the ground, gasping for breath, their eyes wide with panic. Evan, regaining his composure, roared and charged at Maya, this time not with a shove, but with a clumsy, furious punch. But Maya was ready. She tilted her head, easily dodging the punch, and countered with a quick strike to Evan's stomach. The hit wasn't strong enough to cause serious injury, but it was enough to make him double over, clutching his belly, his breath escaping in a groan. "You think this is a game?" Maya said, her voice calm yet sharp, cutting through the noise of the crowd. "You're wrong." The crowd had now formed a wide circle around them, cheers and shouts echoing, but Maya and Mia paid no attention. They moved like a perfect pair, every move calculated, every strike controlled. This wasn't a burst of anger. It was a response honed over the years as Malcolm taught them that true strength comes from discipline. Evan, despite the pain, stood tall, his gaze no longer filled with arrogance, but rather a mix of anger and fear. He charged at Maya once more, but she was ready. She spun around, using Evan's own momentum to send him stumbling forward, then delivered a low kick that struck his knee. Evan collapsed, hands hitting the ground, his face contorted in pain and disbelief. "Get up," Maya said, her voice lacking any mockery, just a straightforward challenge. "You want to keep going? We're ready." On the other side, Mia faced Tyler, who had just clumsily gotten back up, his eyes filled with aggression. He lunged at her, but Mia stood her ground. She leaned to the side, dodging Tyler's punch, and countered with a quick strike to his shoulder, making him stagger. As Tyler tried to attack again, Mia grabbed his wrist, twisted it hard, and shoved him down to the ground for a second time. "Stay down," she said, her voice as cold as steel. "Unless you want more." Nate, sensing the unfavorable situation, hesitated, his gaze flickering between Mia and the crowd. But just as he was about to charge in, Mia shot him a sharp, uncompromising look that made him stop in his tracks. "Don't," she said, her voice low but commanding. Nate stepped back, his hands hanging limply at his sides, as if he realized he had lost before he even began. The schoolyard now echoed with the shouts of the crowd, but it was no longer the sound of mocking laughter. It was a mix of shock, excitement, and a hint of fear. Maya and Mia stood in the center of the circle, their breaths steady, their eyes locked on Evan, Tyler, and Nate, who now lay or crumpled on the ground, their faces a blend of pain and disbelief. The sisters didn't flaunt their victory, nor did they shout in triumph. They simply stood there, shoulder to shoulder, like two unmovable mountains. "You think we're weak," Maya said, her voice ringing out not loud, but clear enough for the whole crowd to hear. "You think you can push us out of here, but you don't know who we are. And now, you've seen it for yourself." Evan, still clutching his stomach, looked up at Maya, his eyes now devoid of any arrogance. All that remained was raw failure, laid bare and impossible to hide. Tyler and Nate didn't dare to stand up, as if fearing that any movement would prolong this nightmare. Mia stepped closer to Maya, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, not in search of applause, but to send a message. "We are here, and we're not going anywhere." The crowd gradually fell silent. the cheers giving way to a sense of unease, as if they had just witnessed something far greater than a mere fight. Maya and Mia turned away, walking past the circle of students, their gazes unwavering. They didn't look back at Evan or his friends. They didn't need to. They had said everything that needed to be said, not with words, but through their actions. The Brightmore campus, for the first time since they arrived, felt like it belonged to them, if only for a moment. The afternoon at the Carter home in the suburbs of Raleigh had a deceptive calm, as if the world was holding its breath after the battle at Brightmore's playground. The sunset bathed the oak trees in golden light, but inside the small kitchen, the atmosphere was heavy, like a lead blanket. Maya and Mia sat across from each other at the dining table, their eyes no longer burning with intensity as they had when facing Evan Whitaker. Now, they were a mix of exhaustion and wariness. They knew that the fight this morning was not the end, it was just the beginning of a much bigger storm. Malcolm Carter leaned against the kitchen counter, his sturdy arms crossed over his chest, his gaze sweeping over his two daughters with deep understanding. He had heard the whole story, from the locker incident to how Evan and his friends took things too far, and finally, the moment Maya and Mia stood up for themselves. He didn't blame them, didn't frown. Instead, he gave a slight nod, a small gesture that held both pride and concern. "You girls did the right thing," he said, his voice deep like granite. "But you need to understand, people like Whitaker don't take defeat easily. They'll bring this fight right to your doorstep." Maya looked up, her gaze sharp despite her heavy eyelids. "They can try," she replied, her voice low but firm. "We're not afraid of them, Dad." Mia, sitting beside her, nodded, her hand resting on the table, fingers intertwined as if holding on to an unshakable resolve. Malcolm stepped forward, pulling a chair out and sitting down, his gaze fixed on the two kids. "Fear isn't the issue," he said. "The issue is preparation. They will come. Not the children, but the adults. And when they do, you need to stand behind your father. Not because I doubt your strength, but because this is a battle I must lead." Both Maya and Mia nodded, fully understanding their father's meaning. Malcolm was not just a dad, he was a veteran who had faced storms far greater than anything Brightmore could throw at them. He had taught them not only how to throw a punch, but also how to stand firm when the whole world tried to knock them down. But today, they sensed a new tension in his voice. Not worry, but the readiness of someone who knew that the next battle wouldn't take place on the playground. As the sunset faded, the sound of an engine roared outside, heavy and menacing. Maya glanced out the window and saw a sleek black SUV come to a stop at the gate, its headlights sweeping across the yard like a warning. Mia stood up, her gaze hardening. "They're here," she whispered, not with fear, but with a chilling sense of confirmation. Malcolm stood up, his tall frame like a fortress. "Stay here," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He stepped out the front door with Maya and Mia right behind him, not to challenge their father's command, but because they needed to see what would happen. They knew their dad was strong enough, but their hearts raced, not out of fear, but from the realization that this was the moment when everything got really serious. The door swung open before the bell rang, and Malcolm stood on the porch, his gaze calm yet sharp as a knife. Helen Whitaker stepped out of the SUV, her high heels clacking loudly on the walkway, her face flushed with a barely contained rage. Right behind her was her husband, Victor Whitaker, a towering figure, his shoulders stiff as if ready to bulldoze through anything in his path. Both radiated the arrogance of those who believe the world should bow before them. "Who do you think you are?" Helen began, her voice sharp as broken glass, devoid of any politeness. "Letting your daughter attack my son? Do you think you can get away with this?" She stepped closer, pointing at Malcolm, her red-painted nails like a threat. Malcolm didn't move. His gaze locked onto Helen, so calm it made her hesitate for a moment. "Your son attacked my daughter first," he replied, his tone steady yet powerful, like an unstoppable river. "They were defending themselves. That's the truth, whether you want to believe it or not." Victor scoffed, stepping forward, his shoulders tense like an athlete before a big game. "Self-defense?" he bellowed, his voice hoarse with anger. "Your two daughters beat up my son like a couple of thugs. You think you can justify that? In this town, you're nothing, Carter." Malcolm remained still, but his gaze darkened, like the sky before a storm. "I don't need to justify myself," he said. "The truth is strong enough to stand on its own. Your son and his friends have been bullying my daughter from day one. They crossed the line, and now they're paying the price. If you want to blame someone, look at how you raised your son." Malcolm's words hit like a punch, quiet yet sharp, causing Helen to gasp, her face contorted with anger. "How dare you!" she shouted, her voice high-pitched, nearly cracking. "Do you think you can talk to us like that? You and your daughters will regret ever stepping foot in Brightmore." Victor, unable to hold back any longer, stepped forward, just a few feet away from Malcolm. "That's enough," he growled, his fists clenched, his eyes flashing with aggression. "I'm going to teach you a lesson right here." He swung his arm, delivering a heavy punch aimed straight at Malcolm's face, fueled by all his anger and pride. But Malcolm was ready. He leaned in, quick as a shadow, dodging the easy punch, then seized Victor's wrist with a precise motion, twisting just enough to throw him off balance. With a gentle pull, Malcolm sent Victor stumbling forward, crashing onto the porch steps, his face flushed with pain and shock. Helen screamed, rushing in, her nails clawing at Malcolm's arm, but he simply leaned away, effortlessly avoiding her frantic strikes. "You come to my house," Malcolm said, his voice low yet resonant, like an undeniable proclamation. "You bring anger and violence here, thinking you can scare us into submission. But you are mistaken. There is no room for threats here." Helen, panting heavily, stepped back, her gaze darting between Malcolm and Victor, who was now struggling to get back up, clutching his aching arm. "You will pay for this," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "You think you can touch us without consequences? You have no idea who we are." Malcolm let go, allowing Helen to step back, his gaze never leaving her. "I know exactly who you are," he replied, his voice as cold as steel. "And I'm not impressed." Victor, now back on his feet, charged in once more. But Malcolm only needed a simple move, a slight lean and a gentle push to send him crashing down again, this time with a heavy exhale that sounded almost like a groan. Maya and Mia, standing right in the doorway, watched it all unfold, their expressions not filled with fear, but with understanding. They saw their father not as an angry man, but as a mountain, steadfast and unshakable. "You've chosen the wrong house to come to," Malcolm said, his voice now carrying a final weight, like a door slamming shut. "And now you'll have to live with that choice." Helen, her eyes wide with panic, stepped back and pulled Victor to his feet. They stumbled back to the car, the sound of her screams fading, as if even she knew they had lost. Maya and Mia stepped out onto the porch, standing beside their father, their eyes following the SUV as it drove away, the red taillights flickering in the darkness. They didn't say a word, but their silence held a promise. No matter how the storm raged on, they would face it together. The atmosphere at the Raleigh police station that evening was heavy like a steel curtain, the fluorescent lights casting cold streaks across the tiled floor. Maya and Mia Carter sat beside their father, Malcolm, on the hard plastic chairs in the waiting area. None of the three showed any signs of fear. Their gazes were sharp, their backs straight, as if they were facing another battle, but this time, armed with the truth. After the confrontation at home, the Whitaker family had called the police, but their accusations quickly faded in the face of undeniable evidence. Sergeant Daniel Hayes, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and eyes sharp as a knife, walked into the waiting room holding a stack of documents. He paused in front of the Carter family, his gaze sweeping over them with a rare respect in a place filled with such tension. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice deep yet clear, "I've reviewed the reports, the testimonies, and even the footage from the neighbor's security camera. Everything is as clear as day." Malcolm nodded slightly, his gaze fixed on Hayes, but he didn't rush to speak. He understood the power of silence, and he wanted to hear everything the officer was about to say. Maya and Mia, sitting on either side of their father, also remained quiet. But their hearts raced a little faster, not out of worry, but because they felt that the moment of justice was drawing near. Hayes opened the file, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the truth. "The security camera footage shows that Mr. Victor Whitaker attacked you first, right on your own front porch. Mrs. Helen Whitaker was involved too, deliberately causing a disturbance. You were simply defending yourself, nothing more." He looked up, his gaze locking onto Malcolm. "Furthermore, we spoke with your neighbors. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Jenkins, and even the boy next door all confirmed that the Whitaker family came to your house with an aggressive attitude. There's nothing that contradicts your statement." Maya felt a warm wave spreading through her chest, as if an invisible knot was being untied. She glanced at Mia, seeing her sister biting her lip, her eyes shining with a hint of quiet satisfaction. They had known the truth would be on their side, but hearing it spoken aloud, confirmed by an outsider, still brought a profound sense of relief. Malcolm finally spoke up, his voice deep and steady. "What about the situation at school?" he asked, not out of doubt, but because he wanted to ensure every shadow of the story was brought to light. "Their son, Evan, and his friends have been bullying my daughter since day one. This morning's incident didn't come out of nowhere." Hayes nodded, flipping to another page in the document. "We've been in touch with Brightmore Academy," he said. "Principal Bennett provided some footage from the school cameras, though I guess he wasn't too thrilled about it. The footage shows Evan Whitaker, Tyler Reed, and Nate Larson relentlessly bullying his daughter for weeks. The locker incident on Friday was clearly recorded, capturing both the vandalism and the crowd watching. And this morning..." He paused, his gaze flickering to Maya and Mia. "The footage shows that the girls were attacked first. What they did was self-defense, completely justified." Mia sat up straighter, her eyes sparkling with a glimmer of light. "So they'll have to pay the price, right?" she asked, her voice low yet sharp, as if she were holding back a fire that was still smoldering within. Hayes looked at her, a small smile flickering across his lips. Not out of joy, but out of respect. "Yes," he replied. "Evan and his two friends will face consequences at school, which could be suspension or worse, depending on the board. As for the Whitaker family..." He paused, his expression turning serious. "Victor and Helen Whitaker will be charged with trespassing, assault, and harassment. We are considering additional charges based on their behavior at your home. They can't deny it with such clear evidence." Malcolm nodded, not with triumph, but with the acknowledgement that justice, though slow, had finally found its way. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said, his voice deep yet sincere. "I just want to make sure my daughter is safe, and that the truth is honored." Hayes nodded, his gaze settling on Maya and Mia. "You two girls," he said, his tone softer, almost friendly. "I know this isn't easy, but you both have stood strong, and that's something to be proud of. Not everyone can do that." Maya smiled softly the first time that day, though her smile still held a hint of hesitation. "We were taught to never bow our heads," she replied, her gaze drifting to her father, who sat with a sturdy presence like a mountain. Mia said nothing, but her eyes spoke volumes, conveying a determination that needed no words. Hayes stood up, ready to leave, but he turned back as if he remembered something. "One more thing," he said. "We will send the full report to Brightmore tomorrow morning. Principal Bennett has promised to review the school's anti-bullying policy. I can't promise everything will change right away, but this is a start." Malcolm stood up, shook Hayes' hand, a simple gesture that carried the weight of mutual respect. "That's all we want," he said. "A chance to make things right." As Hayes left, Maya and Mia stood up and followed their dad out of the police station. The sky outside had turned dark, and the streetlights cast faint streaks of light on the sidewalk. They climbed into Malcolm's old truck, and no one said much, but their silence wasn't heavy. It was the silence of people who had just weathered a storm and knew that, even though there were still rough waters ahead, they had achieved an important victory. Returning home, the kitchen lights flickered on, warm and familiar. Malcolm sat down at the table, with Maya and Mia across from him, the atmosphere now lighter, as if a part of the darkness had been pushed back. "You both did well," Malcolm said, his eyes shining with unspoken pride. "But this isn't the end. Justice may be slow, but it will come as long as we keep standing strong." Maya nodded, her eyes shining brighter as if the fatigue was fading away. "We're ready, Dad," she said. "No matter what happens next." Mia smiled, for the first time that day, a small but radiant smile. "They think they can break us," she said. "But they don't know what we're made of." Malcolm laughed, a warm sound filling the kitchen. "They'll learn," he replied, "and this time the whole world will see." As the kitchen lights dimmed and the Carter family prepared for a new day, they knew that Brightmore would never be the same again. Justice had been served, not just for them, but for all those who had ever been pushed to the margins. And even though the road ahead was long, they walked forward with the belief that the truth, like a flame, would always find a way to shine bright. That morning at Brightmore Academy had a fresh vibe, as if the sunlight was streaming through the ancient oak trees, washed clean after a long storm. The red brick walls of the prestigious private school in the suburbs of Raleigh, North Carolina, still stood strong as they had for centuries, but the atmosphere inside had shifted. Gone were the sharp whispers and scrutinizing glances. Instead, there was a profound silence, as if the entire school was learning to breathe again to a new rhythm. Maya and Mia Carter walked through the school gates, their navy blue uniforms crisp and neat, backpacks securely slung over their shoulders. They no longer walked with the caution they had in the beginning, but their eyes remained sharp, always ready for any challenge that might come their way. However, today, there were no challenges waiting for them. The crowd of students in the schoolyard parted as they passed, not with hostility, but with a quiet respect. A few nodded in greeting, their gazes a bit shy, as if silently apologizing for having once stared or laughed along. The incident involving Evan Whitaker and his friends spread through Brightmore faster than a wildfire. News of Evan, Tyler, and Nate being expelled circulated through group texts, whispered conversations in class, and even hasty social media posts that were quickly deleted. But what really had everyone buzzing wasn't just the punishment. It was how Maya and Mia stood their ground, not only against the bullies, but against a system that had long tolerated injustice. They changed the game, not by bowing down, but by holding their heads high and fighting back. In the principal's office, Mr. Lawrence Bennett sat behind his oak desk, his face tense, but no longer wearing the smug expression he once had. In front of him was Malcolm Carter, a tall figure with a calm yet unyielding gaze. Maya and Mia sat on either side of their father, their eyes shining with a newfound confidence, not arrogance, but the certainty of those who knew they had won not just a battle, but an entire war. After reviewing the report from the police and the surveillance footage, Mr. Bennett began, his voice dry yet carrying a rare hint of sincerity. "The board has lifted the suspension of both of you. Mia, you can return to class today." He paused, cleared his throat, as if the next words were harder to say. "As for Evan Whitaker, Tyler Reed, and Nate Larson, they have been permanently expelled. Their behavior is unacceptable, and we apologize for not acting sooner." Malcolm nodded slightly, his gaze fixed on Bennett. "That's what should have been done from the start," he said, his voice deep yet sharp, not to cast blame, but to affirm an undeniable truth. "But I don't just want justice for my daughter. I want to make sure that no other child has to go through what they endured." Bennett nodded, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if he were trying to maintain his authority. "We are revising the anti-bullying policy," he said. "There will be training sessions for teachers and an anonymous reporting system for students. Brightmore will not let this happen again." Maya looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "Make sure of that," she said, her voice soft, yet heavy with the weight of someone who has been pushed to the brink and come out the other side. "Not just for us, but for everyone who walks in here and feels like they don't belong," Mia added, her voice as solid as rock. "Brightmore isn't anyone's private playground," she said. "It's time for everyone to understand that." Bennett blinked, as if taken aback by the sisters' straightforwardness, but he didn't object. He simply nodded, a small gesture, but enough to show he understood that the era of indifference was over. Malcolm placed his hand on his daughter's shoulders, a silent gesture brimming with pride. They stood up, left the office, and stepped into the marble hallway that no longer felt like an arena, but rather a path they had forged for themselves. In the first literature class with Ms. Harris, Maya and Mia sat in the middle row, just like always. But this time, there were no giggles or whispers from behind. Ms. Harris called their names during roll call, this time with a small smile, her gaze genuinely focused on them instead of skimming past as she usually did. When Mia raised her hand to answer a question about Shakespeare, her voice rang out clearly, and the whole class listened, not with mockery, but with genuine attention. At lunchtime, the two sisters sat under the shade of a large oak tree in the schoolyard, sunlight filtering through the leaves and creating sparkling patches on the ground. They opened the lunchbox their mom had prepared, revealing chicken sandwiches and a handful of potato chips, and ate peacefully, their laughter ringing out naturally, no longer held back by caution. A few students walked by, and a girl with her hair tied up stopped, hesitating. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but sincere. I'm sorry for not speaking up that day. You guys are really strong." Maya smiled and nodded while Mia just shrugged, but her gaze softened, as if accepting the apology. In the following days, Brightmore continued to change, slowly but surely. Teachers began to pay more attention to how students interacted, no longer ignoring the signs of something unusual. A bulletin board appeared in the hallway, advertising a new club aimed at promoting inclusion, and Maya noticed that a few students who once stood in the crowd were now actively striking up conversations with her in class. Not everything was perfect. There were still sidelong glances and hushed whispers. But the atmosphere had lightened, as if a toxic fog had finally lifted. One afternoon, Maya and Mia sat in the backyard, the sunset glowing red like a promise of better days ahead. Malcolm stood nearby, holding a cup of coffee, his gaze sweeping over his daughters with quiet satisfaction. "You girls have done more than just stand your ground," he said, his voice warm. "You've made an entire school take a hard look at itself. That's real power." Maya looked at her dad, her eyes lighting up. "We're learning from the best," she replied, her smile a bit mischievous but full of love. Mia, perched on the wooden chair, added, "And we're not stopping anytime soon. If any other Evan Whitakers show up, we'll be ready." Malcolm laughed heartily, the sound echoing in the yard like a triumphant anthem. "I have no doubt about that," he said, his eyes shining with absolute faith in his two daughters. As the sun set, Maya and Mia sat close together, watching the sky shift from red to purple. They didn't say much, but their silence was filled with the strength of those who have faced prejudice, fought back, and emerged victorious. Brightmore was no longer just a battleground. It was the place where they declared their right to exist, not just for themselves, but for everyone who would come after them. And no matter what challenges the future might bring, they knew that together they could overcome anything. Thank you for joining us on Legendary Narratives through the inspiring story of Maya and Mia Carter. We have witnessed their resilient journey from facing prejudice in Brightmore to the moment they stood up and turned their pain into strength. We hope this story reminds you that courage and unity can change the world. If you enjoyed this journey, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next inspiring stories. Share this video with your friends to help spread the message of justice and hope. We'll see you in our next video on our channel. Wishing you a day full of energy and positive vibes.